Was Chris Tucker not talked about being in next Friday? Because I know it was Mike Epps, but
Yeah, we wanted him. You know, he turned it down.
really?
Yeah, he turned it down. You'll hear 1,000 different stories, but yeah, we wanted to pay him $12 million to do that movie.
What?
A $12 million payday still wasn't enough to bring Chris Tucker back to the role that made him famous. 25 years after Friday turned him and Ice Cube into one of comedy's most iconic duos, fans are still asking why Smokey disappeared while the franchise continued without him. What looked like a simple casting decision was actually tied to faith, fame, money, and a behind-the-scenes split that permanently changed the series. So why did Chris Tucker walk away from Friday at the peak of its success? And what has Ice Cube finally revealed about the fallout between them after all these years? Join us as we uncover the full truth behind Chris Tucker's exit from Friday and why Ice Cube will never work with him again. The man who came out of Compton with something to say. Friday was not a random project that fell into Ice Cube's lap. It was a deliberate, creative decision made by a man who had already been through more professional and personal turmoil in his late teens and early 20s than most people experience across an entire lifetime. O'Shea Jackson was born in the Baldwin Hills neighborhood of South Central Los Angeles. His mother Doris worked as a hospital clerk. His father Hosea was a groundskeeper at UCLA. His older brother gave him the nickname Ice Cube for his confident, cool manner around girls much older than himself. It was a nickname that stuck so completely that most people who have known him for decades do not readily connect it to the actual story of how it arrived. His parents, concerned about the accelerating violence and drug activity in South Central during the early 1980s, made the decision to bus the teenage O'Shea to a suburban high school in the San Fernando Valley rather than allowing him to attend his local school. For a kid who had grown up seeing nothing beyond the deteriorating blocks of South Central, the affluence and stability of the valley left a sharp impression. He saw his hometown from the outside for the first time and started writing about what he had seen from both sides. He was 16 years old when he wrote the song Boys in the Hood for Eazy-E, a track that eventually became one of the founding documents of gangsta rap. He had been writing rhymes since his early teens, initially challenged by a friend at school to try and compose something, and the talent he had was immediately apparent to everyone who heard him. He enrolled at the Phoenix Institute of Technology in Arizona and earned a diploma in architectural drafting, a qualification he has joked about having essentially no use for by the time he returned to Los Angeles. He came back and threw himself into the formation of NWA alongside Eazy-E and Dr. Dre, contributing the majority of the writing on their landmark 1988 debut Straight Outta Compton. The album included Fuck the Police, a track that generated a formal warning letter from the FBI, and it reshaped American popular music so completely that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame eventually inducted the group in 2016. Ice Cube had written much of what critics called one of the most transformative albums in history, and he had done it before he was 20 years old. Then the money dispute happened. Feeling cheated out of the royalties his contribution deserved, he walked out of NWA in December 1989 and went solo. His debut album, AmeriKKK's Most Wanted, produced with the Bomb Squad in New York, was released in 1990 and was immediately recognized as one of the most uncompromising and politically serious hip-hop records ever made. He followed it with Death Certificate in 1991 and The Predator in 1992, building a solo discography that matched, and in some critics' view exceeded anything he had done with NWA. But as remarkable as those records were, they carried a weight and a darkness that had limits as a commercial proposition. The version of Ice Cube that made those albums was not going to be invited to many Hollywood meetings, which is exactly why the pivot he made toward film was so surprising, and why the creative decision behind Friday was so carefully considered. But before Friday could happen, someone had to take a chance on a rapper with an FBI warning letter in his history starring in a comedy. And the path that led to that gamble getting made is more interesting than most people know. So how exactly did the hardest man in America end up writing and starring in one of the most beloved comedies of the 1990s? How Friday got made against every possible odd. The idea that became Friday started with a specific creative frustration that Ice Cube and his collaborator DJ Pooh shared about the way black neighborhoods were being represented on screen. The movies of the early 1990s that depicted South Central Los Angeles, films like Boys in the Hood and Colors, painted a picture of unrelenting violence, menace, and tragedy. Those films were honest and important in their own way, but they were also incomplete. The people who had grown up in those neighborhoods knew that there was an entire other side to the story, one where people sat on porches and laughed, where friendships were sustained through ridiculous situations, where the comedy of everyday life was as present as the danger. Ice Cube and DJ Pooh wanted to make a film about that version of the hood, not to deny the reality of what the neighborhood could be, but to show the rest of it, the part that the dramatic films consistently left out. Ice Cube has said explicitly that the film's premise comes directly from his personal experiences, that a majority of what happens in the story is based on actual events from his own life and neighborhood. Craig being fired from his job on his day off was based on Ice Cube's cousin. Smokey's drug dealer predicament came from DJ Pooh's own history. The whole texture of the film came from real memory, rather than imagined drama. They pitched the script to New Line Cinema, citing Kevin Smith's Clerks as a model for how an extremely low-budget, single-location indie comedy could work. New Line agreed to fund it, but with significant conditions attached. The budget was set at $3.5 million. The shooting schedule was locked to 20 days, and crucially, New Line insisted that Ice Cube be paired with a more experienced comedian in the lead role, someone whose comedy credentials were established enough to give the studio confidence that the film would actually be funny. Ice Cube, despite everything he had done in music, was essentially an unknown quantity as a comedy lead, and the studio wanted insurance. Ice Cube chose F. Gary Gray to direct. Gray had been making music videos, including several for Ice Cube himself, and had never directed a feature film. The director's own response to being offered the job captured the challenge the film was taking on perfectly. He said that Ice Cube was the toughest man in America, and that when you take someone who delivers hard-hitting social issues and hardcore gangsta rap and who has a hardcore view on politics, you would never think comedy. Gray said frankly that the idea scared the hell out of him. He took the job anyway. For the role of Smokey, the script's other lead, Ice Cube and DJ Pooh first considered giving it to DJ Pooh himself. New Line said no. They considered Chris Rock and Tommy Davidson. They landed on Chris Tucker, who at that point was a young stand-up comedian from Atlanta, who had been doing appearances on Def Comedy Jam and had a small film debut in House Party 3 behind him. Chris almost did not get the role. His first audition was described as not great. The chemistry that eventually emerged on screen did not appear in that first reading, and there was genuine uncertainty about whether he was the right choice. He was given a second chance, the chemistry appeared, and the decision was made. Principal photography took place over those 20 days in August 1994 on 126th Street in South Central Los Angeles, which was F. Gary Gray's actual childhood block. The houses used in the film belonged to people Gray knew personally. The production was so close to the real environment, it was depicting that cast and crew were told explicitly not to wear the color red during filming because red was associated with the Bloods street gang, and wearing it in a neighborhood dominated by the Crips could cause real problems. At one point during filming, actual gang members interrupted a scene and refused to leave, and the production had to negotiate around them rather than asking them to go. Chris Tucker improvised most of his best material. His famous line, "You got knocked the fuck out," was not in the original script. It came from Chris in the moment, and it went directly into the film. A one-page scene would frequently stretch to 2 pages during filming because Chris was adding material in real time, and the director was good enough to recognize what was working and let it run. The rough-cut screenings were genuinely nerve-wracking for everyone involved. Chris, Ice Cube, and Gray all sat in those screenings not knowing if what they had made was going to connect with anyone. Eventually, it connected with everyone. So how did a 20-day, $3.5 million film shot on one block in South Central end up becoming a cultural institution that is still being quoted 30 years later? The phenomenon that nobody predicted, and what it did to both of them. Friday opened on April 26, 1995, in 865 theaters and made $6.5 million in its first weekend, doubling its entire budget in those opening days. It went on to earn $27 million in North America alone, making it one of the most profitable films of the year relative to its cost. Quentin Tarantino named it as one of his 20 favorite films of the previous 25 years. The phrase, "Bye Felicia," uttered once in passing by Craig to dismiss an unwanted visitor, became one of the most widely used cultural references in American internet history. Tiny Lister's character Debo became such a symbol of neighborhood intimidation that professional athletes started using the name as a nickname. The film made Ice Cube a bankable movie star in a way that nothing he had done in music had quite managed. His public image had been built around confrontation, political fury, and authentic street credibility. Friday offered something entirely different, a warm, funny, relatable version of the same neighborhood he had been rapping about, where his natural intelligence expressed itself through comedy rather than polemic. Hollywood noticed. Within a few years, he was making Boys in the Hood follow-ups, war films like Three Kings, and eventually family comedies that reached audiences his rap albums had never touched. For Chris Tucker, the film did something even more dramatic. It turned a young stand-up comedian with no real film profile into one of the most in-demand comedy actors in Hollywood almost overnight. The specific energy he brought to Smokey, the manic verbal speed, the physical expressiveness, the improvisational instinct, the warmth underneath the chaos, landed with audiences as something they had not quite seen before. He was immediately recognized as a genuine talent, and the industry responded accordingly. Within 2 years of Friday, Chris had appeared in The Fifth Element opposite Bruce Willis, in Money Talks as a Charlie Sheen co-lead, and in Jackie Brown for Quentin Tarantino. In 1998, he starred alongside Jackie Chan in Rush Hour, which became a massive global hit and launched one of the most commercially successful buddy comedy franchises in cinema history. For Rush Hour 2 in 2001, he negotiated a $20 million salary. For Rush Hour 3 in 2007, he was paid $25 million, making him the highest-paid actor in Hollywood at that point in time. The young man who had almost not been cast as Smokey had become one of the most valuable entertainers on the planet in less than a decade. But here is the part that connects back to Friday in a way most people still do not fully understand. Between his Rush Hour debut in 1998 and Rush Hour 3 in 2007, a period of 9 full years, Chris Tucker did not appear in a single film that was not a Rush Hour sequel. Not one. He made Michael Jackson music videos. He did charity work across Africa. He appeared at events, but the movies simply stopped coming. And the reason they stopped coming had already been established years before Rush Hour ever happened. So if the film that made both of them famous set them on paths of extraordinary success, why was the sequel that should have brought them back together one of the most expensive missed opportunities in Hollywood history? $12 million and the answer: nobody expected. When Next Friday was announced, and Ice Cube began assembling the production, the assumption among fans was essentially universal. Chris Tucker would be back as Smokey. The chemistry that had made the first film work was so specific to those two people together that it was genuinely hard to imagine the sequel without it. Ice Cube understood this, and he came to the negotiating table ready to pay for what he needed. Ice Cube's offer to Chris for Next Friday was between $10 and $12 million. That is an extraordinary sum for a sequel to a film that had originally paid its cast union scale. Chris himself had earned a modest amount for his work in the first film, which was made on a budget of $3.5 million, with everyone paid at the base professional rate, because that was all the budget allowed. The jump from union scale to $12 million in the space of 5 years is a reflection of how dramatically Chris's market value had risen in the time since Friday. Chris said no, not for more money or for a different offer. He simply said no. For years, the reason circulated as rumor and speculation. Some people assumed it was a money dispute, that Chris's team had asked for more than $12 million and Ice Cube had not matched it. Others suggested a personal falling out between the two men that neither was willing to discuss publicly. The truth, when it finally came out in full, was neither of those things. In December 2021, A fan on Twitter asked Ice Cube directly why Chris was not in the Friday sequels. The assumption in the question was that money was the issue. Ice Cube's reply was direct and complete and left nothing ambiguous. He wrote, "We were ready to pay Chris Tucker $10 to $12 million to do next Friday, but he turned us down for religious reasons. He didn't want to cuss or smoke weed on camera anymore." Chris himself has confirmed this explanation across multiple interviews in different ways. In an interview with All Urban Central, he said that one of the reasons he did not return for the second Friday was because of the weed element. He said the movie had become a phenomenon, and he did not want everybody to be smoking weed because of it. He said he felt he did not want to represent everybody smoking weed. He had not fully explained this publicly before, he said, partly because he had simply forgotten about it, and when it came back to him in that conversation, he was honest about it for the first time. Chris became a born-again Christian in 1997, the year before Rush Hour released, which means his religious conversion happened before his breakthrough into global stardom, but after Friday had already established his public persona. The conversion changed how he thought about what he was willing to put on screen and how he was willing to be seen. He told the Georgia Straight in 2014 that being a Christian helps him in comedy because it forces him to dig deeper to find material that is still funny without relying on profanity or raunchiness. He said most comics talk about stuff that is easy, maybe cussing or saying something raunchy, and that he has to find something that is still funny without going there. He called it harder, but said he liked the challenge. He also told an interviewer that he never really wanted to do a sequel in the first place, quite apart from the religious considerations. He had faith that the small movie would attract enough attention to open bigger doors, and he wanted to let Smokey be great and then move on. He said explicitly that he wanted to make the character memorable and then leave it there, which is the opposite of how most young actors think about a breakout role. Most people in that position would fight to keep the character alive for as long as the money kept coming. Chris's instinct was to walk away from it the moment he had what he needed from it, which raises a question that Ice Cube has also addressed directly, and which changes the tone of the whole conversation from money to something more personal. If the religious explanation is the true and complete reason Tucker declined, why did Ice Cube eventually reach the point of saying never again? What Ice Cube actually said and what it really means. The title of this story promises that Ice Cube reveals why he will never work with Chris Tucker again. And it is important to be precise about exactly what has been said and what the full context is, because the full picture is not quite the explosive personal feud that the title might imply, and understanding the distinction matters. Ice Cube has never said, in those exact words, that he will never work with Chris again. What he has said, consistently and across multiple platforms over many years, is that he gave Chris multiple opportunities to return to the Friday franchise at extraordinary financial terms. Chris declined every single one of them, and at some point the conversation simply stopped because there was nothing left to discuss. The door that Chris chose not to walk through was offered repeatedly, and the repeated declining of it closed it in a way that has never been reopened. On the Full Send podcast, Ice Cube described the situation plainly. He said you will hear 1,000 different stories about what happened, but the truth is, they were ready to pay Chris $12 million to do the movie and Tucker turned it down. He said Tucker made his choice, and they had to move forward. The tone was not one of bitterness or personal anger. It was the tone of a producer who had made a significant financial offer, had it refused, and had gone ahead with the project without the person they wanted most. What happened after Chris said no is its own significant story. Mike Epps was brought in to play Day, Craig's cousin, for next Friday in 2000, and Friday after next in 2002. Epps is a talented comedian who brought real energy to both sequels. The films made money. Neither of them has the cultural weight of the original, and the most consistent explanation fans and critics offer for why is the absence of Chris and the specific chemistry he created with Ice Cube in the first film. You cannot replicate an accident of casting. The dynamic between Craig and Smokey was something that emerged from the specific combination of those two people at that specific moment, and the sequels carry the shadow of that original combination even when they are doing their best work. Ice Cube has also spoken publicly about his frustration with Warner Brothers regarding the fourth Friday film, which he spent years trying to get made while the studio held the distribution rights, and was unwilling to either proceed with the sequel or release control of it back to him. He used the hashtag #FreeFriday on social media and appeared on multiple platforms describing the situation as Warner Brothers hijacking the happiness of the culture. In April 2025, he finally reached a deal with Warner Brothers and New Line to write and star in Last Friday, the long-awaited fourth installment, with Mike DeLuca, the executive who had been at New Line during the original Friday's production, now running Warner Brothers and personally pushing to get the project moving again. In a January 2026 appearance on Club Shay Shay, Mike Epps confirmed that he and Ice Cube had been in a writing room with Boondocks creator Aaron Magruder and original Friday co-writer DJ Pooh, actively working on the script. Ice Cube has said publicly that he is pushing for a release by April 2027 to coincide with the original film's 32nd anniversary. The question of whether Chris Tucker will be part of that film has not been formally answered. What has been made clear across everything Ice Cube has said on the subject over the past decade is that his relationship with Chris Tucker has not been personal or hostile. It has simply been over in a professional sense for a very long time. Chris made his choices about what he was and was not willing to put on screen, and those choices were incompatible with what the Friday franchise required. Ice Cube respected those choices enough not to fight them or try to work around them, and the professional partnership that produced one of the most beloved comedies of the decade ended as a direct result. So where is Chris Tucker now, and has the man who walked away from $12 million ever looked back at that decision with any regret? Where Chris is now, and whether he regrets any of it. Chris Tucker is 54 years old and has spent the better part of 3 decades making choices that confused and sometimes frustrated the entertainment industry, then living with those choices in a way that suggests he has never found them particularly troubling. After the Rush Hour franchise ended with the third film in 2007, he essentially stopped making films. The industry's response was initially puzzled and then resigned. He was earning the kind of money that made working optional, and he had said publicly that he wanted to wait for roles that were worth doing rather than filling his schedule. The explanation sounds simple, but in an industry that equates inactivity with declining value, simply not doing anything for several years is one of the fastest ways to become irrelevant. His return when it came was measured and deliberate. In 2012, he appeared in Silver Linings Playbook in a supporting role that earned warm reviews, demonstrating he had not lost the ability to be genuinely funny and present on screen. In 2015, he released a Netflix stand-up special called Chris Tucker Live that showed a performer who had deepened considerably since the Smokey years. In 2022, he appeared alongside Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, and Viola Davis in Air, playing Nike executive Howard White in the story of how the company landed Michael Jordan. In November 2025, Tucker was confirmed to have begun production on Rush Hour 4 alongside Jackie Chan, a film that U.S. President Donald Trump reportedly pushed to have made, which is an unusual piece of information to have in the same sentence as a Rush Hour sequel, but is apparently accurate. His financial situation has been complicated over the years. Despite earning $40 million over the Rush Hour franchise, Chris had well-documented difficulties with the IRS, including a reported $11 million in state and federal tax liens by 2012. His home was foreclosed in 2011. He has spent time rebuilding those finances through stand-up comedy tours that have taken him across the world, including Australia, the Middle East, and the Riyadh Comedy Festival in 2025. On the subject of Smokey and Friday, Chris has landed in a nuanced place. He has said in interviews that he does not fully regret the original film. He recognizes it as important work that opened enormous doors. But he has also acknowledged that the character came to represent something, particularly the glorification of marijuana use, that he became genuinely uncomfortable with as his faith deepened. He told an interviewer that the movie became a phenomenon, and he did not want everybody smoking weed. He described that concern as one of the reasons, though not the only one, why he chose not to return for the sequel. And he was honest about having largely forgotten that this was part of his thinking until someone asked him directly years later. What Chris's choices reveal, across the full arc of his career, is a person who has consistently prioritized what felt right to him over what would have been most commercially sensible. Turning down $12 million to avoid playing a weed-smoking character on screen is not the choice that most people in his position would make. Walking away from Hollywood at the height of his earning power to do charity work, travel, and pursue his faith is not the standard career management strategy. Making a comeback in a supporting role in a drama rather than leading another action comedy franchise is not the obvious path. But it is his path, and he has walked it with a consistency that the people around him have described as genuine rather than calculated. His former co-stars in the Friday world have strong opinions about his decision. Nia Long said she found it frustrating. Regina King said she understood, but wished things had been different. Ice Cube said he would have paid him $12 million, which is about as direct as an expression of genuine regret about a professional split can get without being personal. The closest thing to a definitive statement on the matter from Ice Cube himself came in the series of tweets he sent in December 2021. He was not angry. He was clarifying. He had been accused of shorting his cast. Faison Love made noise about being paid only $2,500 for his role as Big Worm, and Ice Cube pushed back directly. He pointed out that the film cost $2.3 million and was shot in 20 days, that all actors got paid union scale, and that they could have said no, but they did not. His frustration was about being accused of theft from people he had worked with honestly, and within the budget he had been given. The Tucker clarification was a separate piece of the same conversation, offered as a correction to a false narrative rather than as an attack on Tucker as a person. The conclusion is not dramatic. Two people made a movie together. The movie became a phenomenon. One of them wanted to continue it. The other had personal reasons not to. The one who wanted to continue respected those personal reasons enough not to fight them. $12 million sat unclaimed on a table for a while, and then the table was put away. And the film that started it all is still being quoted by people who were not born when it was made, which is a better outcome than either of them had any right to expect from a 20-day shoot on a $3.5 million budget on one block in South Central Los Angeles. But Chris rejecting the role didn't stop the movie from going so well, and now fans are expecting even another addition to the franchise next Friday. The exciting new update. Nearly 30 years after Friday became one of the most influential comedy films of its generation, the long-awaited fourth installment in the franchise is finally moving forward. Fans have spent years wondering whether another sequel would ever happen, especially after constant delays, behind-the-scenes setbacks, and the absence of some of the franchise's most beloved stars. Now, Ice Cube and Mike Epps have confirmed that Last Friday is officially in development at Warner Brothers, with filming expected to begin later this year. According to the actors, the upcoming sequel will reportedly focus on the gentrification of the neighborhood that served as the heart of the original films. That theme could bring a more emotional and modern layer to the franchise while still keeping the humor and street-level storytelling that made the earlier movies so popular. However, the biggest question surrounding the project has always been whether Chris Tucker would finally return as Smokey after nearly 30 years away from the series. During a recent interview, both Ice Cube and Mike revealed that conversations with Tucker are already taking place and that the actor is genuinely interested in returning. Although no official deal has been announced yet, Ice Cube sounded confident that Chris will ultimately join the film. If that happens, Last Friday could finally deliver the reunion fans have waited decades to see. Where do you stand on Chris's decision to walk away from Smokey? And do you think he will be back for next Friday? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.